Hi guys, Graham from Penguin Motors here. Welcome to part one of dyno test on Sean's V8 P6 engine. So, as I said in the intro, this is Sean's V8 P6 engine. I believe he bought the car and the engine as an unfinished project. The engine has been rebuilt by personal persons unknown. We don't know what it's like. Initially, Sean contacted me and said, would I be interested in sticking it on a dyno, fitting the distributor, setting the carbs up, etc. I said, sure, bring it down. So here it is. Although I think he's now asked me to take the intake manifold off and look in the top of the engine and pop the sump off and look in the bottom. So we're going to have a bit of a sneak preview as to what's inside it. What I'm going to do now is a very quick walk around of the engine itself, what I can see with it here bolted to the pallet, and then we'll get it up on engine stand and take a better look. So starting at the front here, curiously and wobbly, we have a fuel pump, which is actually upside down. It goes that way up, which is perhaps, I suspect, why it wasn't bolted on properly. And you won't be able to see it from that camera angle, but we've got an early type rope seal cover. And if I look inside the fuel pump housing, we can see it's actually got a roller chain in it. First glance, everything all at the top looks good. Except if we go to operate the choke mechanism, the carb jets are both jammed. So if the jet tubes are stuck in the SUs, it suggests this has sat for a long while. And if I stick a finger in a dash pot, I cannot lift that dash pot, whereas this one moves up and down nicely. Overall, the engine looks clean. However, when we look at the back of the engine here, it's not, which leads me to believe it hasn't been professionally cleaned. It's probably been cleaned whilst on an engine stand, because on most engine stands you cannot access the back of the block. So whilst most of it looks clean, this is rather dirty in here, which leads me to wonder how clean the engine is internally. As would be correct for a P6, rope seal rear main. And this is an early one because it's got the engine number there at the top of the bell housing, not down by the dipstick tube. Moving around to the front corner of the engine, nothing much to report other than we've got a spacer in the oil pump. So it's obviously an early timing cover, which would be correct because the rope seal says it would be. It's an early cover with a spacer plate and wider gears installed. Not particularly a fan of them myself, because in my experience, if the engine's good, it doesn't need wider gears, and the spacer plates tend to make leaks. And if the spacer plate and the gasket thicknesses all involved don't stack up correctly, they don't actually do a great deal for oil pressure. But anyway, we'll see what that's like. If I stick a finger up an exhaust port, I'm getting carbon. So whilst the heads have been skimmed, I don't think they've had a massive amount of attention. because otherwise I wouldn't have a dirty finger. So here we are, off camera. I've already removed the intake manifold with carbs, bolts out the sump, and most of the screws out the rocker cover. But I've not been into it yet, so I think first I'm going to whip the rocker covers off and we can have a quick peek in there. No gaskets. Okay, well, no gaskets, that's a surprise. They obviously weren't meant to stay on. The rockers are not new, which is a bit of a cause for concern because they are very prone to wear. So, let's look in the valley. Okay, it's fairly clean in here, which is a good sign. Clearly the cam is new. Fair bill of silicone. It's reasonably clean, but yeah, it's definitely not had a proper clean. But it doesn't look in too bad a shape. Right, let's just flip it over and hope we don't end up with the big oily mess on the floor. It's not spotless, but it's pretty clean. It's obviously had a refresh at home. I think while we've got it this way up, we ought to have a quick look at a couple of bearing shells, look at the condition. Sump off and baffle plate out. Take a look in the bottom. It's a little concerning. What we're actually looking here is a rusty beam on a conrod. That furriness is rust. If we were to run the engine like that, we risk major damage. In fact, we can also see rust on the that is all rust that I'm moving around on the crank web with my screwdriver. And look at some of the bottoms of the bores. Some of the bores are rusty. I'm not going to try and turn the engine over because I don't want to try and scrape pistons and rings up and down rusty bores. But I'm afraid this now needs an absolute minimum of stripping, de-rusting and reassembling. I'm going to turn the camera around in a minute, see if I can show you a bit of rusty bore. There you go, in this shot we can see another rod. The beam's clearly rusty and we can see some brown staining on the cylinder wall. So here we are, I've cracked off a big end. Crank looks good. Bearing. Bearing looks good. Camera probably won't pick it up, but there's some very light scoring from where it's obviously been rotated. Cleveite 77 bearing, so it's a good bearing. It feels thin and it's not marked, so at this stage I'm assuming the crank is still standard. Yeah, that sounds a bit... I've already cracked off the nuts, so The rockers themselves don't look too badly worn, but if I pull them back, there's some very nasty wear ridges there. And what that is, that's debris and particle gets ingrained in the rockers. Being aluminium, they're soft. They will absorb metallic particles and they will bed themselves in the aluminium and wear out the hardened shaft. I don't know if you can hear that. That is my thumbnail across the roughness. There's quite a step there. So I'm afraid the rockers and the rocker shafts are junk. So I'm afraid now what I've got to do is send a difficult email to Sean, the owner of this engine, because to be honest, it's not fit for dyno testing. I could, but I think all that rust sitting on the various components is an absolute recipe for disaster. That will end up in the oil system and that will cause wear. If nothing else, it will wear the oil pump because the oil pump itself doesn't get filtered. Yeah, it needs rocker shafts and clearly all that rust needs removing from the bores. Unfortunately, a full strip is what's on the cards for this, but I'd better make that phone call first. So hopefully we'll catch you for episode 2, which will be, I don't know, episode 2 was going to be a dyno test, but I somehow think it won't be. Not yet anyway. Right, catch you on the flip side, guys.